Hey guys, this is the carb of the XT600 Ténéré from the first models. You can recognize it from this bowl up here. It actually works a bit different. There's no membrane in it, but we will see that once we disassemble it. So that's the side that mounts to the engine. We have the choke here with this lever that can be activated. We have the throttle in the middle on this carb, which activates the slider on this side directly by motion. And then once you fully open the throttle, then it should actually open up the valve on this side as well. So you see the activation there. So only when it's like fully activated, it will open this throttle valve, which then opens this vacuum slider. There's a tube missing. Actually, there's a tube going from here to here, from the float bowl to the main jet of the secondary carb. That was just lost somehow. Now we're gonna take both carburetors apart and then clean them and reassemble them with some new gaskets we have here. We also have another needle valve which fits, and we also have some repair parts for the air valve. Then we got some new screws, because the original ones here are like this pattern and they get stripped out very easily. So we're just gonna use Allen bolts to solve that issue. When you're taking apart a carb for the first time, make sure to get some pictures, at best from all the sides, some details and angles where you can see everything, because usually the part you don't document is the one that you will need later on. So make sure you document it well, so you don't have any issues when assembling it back. First off, let's remove the screws or the bolts that keep those both carburetors together, so we can then separate them. And then on this side there are 4 bolts located here. We're just gonna loosen them. Now it's best to make sure that you either put the bolts back into place where they were, or just make sure you don't lose track on where they go. So with this one and this supporting place removed, we can actually take off this tube here, and then there's another tube right here, and we can just separate the secondary carb from the main carb. Let's take on the secondary carb first. There we go. So that's the main compartment, which has a spring in it. And then there's this slider that goes here, and there's no membrane in this carb, so it's a bit easier to fix. On those sliders, make sure that they don't have any scratches in them. You can feel that with your nails. Then there's a little gasket here. And now for the nozzle, you can just unscrew that. And then there's a little piece in there. You can actually see it Let's make sure you get that. That's the piece right here where my screwdriver points. And here you can just take your finger, press it in, and then it should pop right out. And if it doesn't do that, just give it some taps, and then you will have the nozzle removed. So that belongs together. Now we are not gonna disassemble the throttle valve here, but that would be actually quite simple. You just need to undo this nut here, and then also remove the two screws from the throttle plate, and you can slide that right out. Just make sure to not lose the spring. That's basically it for the secondary carb. There's a little screw adjustment here, which is visible from the inside. That's this one here. That's actually just to make sure the groove on the slider matches and it doesn't spin around in it. It can just move up and down. Now let's get to the main carb. I guess first off we're gonna release the idle screw. When removing adjusters like that, make sure that before you start removing them, you count, or you make a reference on how far it was in, how many turns, or what's the distance. It just makes it easier for assembly later on. Now let's take away some accessories. Here, this choke lever can be undone with this small bolt here. Choke needs to be unscrewed. There we go. And once that's done, we can just slide the whole assembly out and also remove the choke and make sure it's not too badly worn or scratched on the surface, otherwise we could get some air leaks later on. Next up, we're gonna open up the top of the carb. This can be taken right off, and there's a small gasket underneath it. Now next up, we're gonna release the throttle plate. So that's a nut here, and then it goes nut, washer. Make sure that doesn't spring away, that's under spring tension. And this part, then we go with this one, and lastly the spring here. To remove that, let's undo this screw here. And we can just pull out this axis. Spring is out, and I'm just gonna set this screw in here again. Remove the throttle slider if we already undone that. So that's in here. There's one flathead screw to remove this part. And then it can just be pulled out with some wiggling. And now if you want to remove the needle, we need a tiny screwdriver, and there's actually 2 screws. One here, one here. You can see them from these sides here. There's 2 screws in there. Now that's undone. So that's the mechanism here. And now we need to pay attention because the needle is actually hosted by a washer, a plastic washer. Then there's the needle clip. So there's a plastic washer, needle clip, and then a little tiny spring underneath it. So make sure we don't lose that. And that's basically it for this cylinder. Let's remove the float bowl. There we go. So in here we can see the swimmer, which actually shuts off the fuel. Once enough fuel is in the float bowl, it presses on the needle here and then limits that fuel doesn't run in from the fuel tank. So this can be removed by taking out this little pin right here. And then we can pull that assembly out, and now we see the needle is actually slotted into place like this, so it stays tight all the time. Then there is the main jet, which is actually 2 pieces. So it's the main jet nozzle, and we have the main jet itself. This one is a 125 for this model. And then we go to the pilot jet, which is located in here, in this hole. It's a flathead. Make sure to not strip it. And once you feel it clicking, turn the carb around, get it out. So that's the pilot jet. This one size is, I don't know, can't read it. With that done, now we have something left. I just seen something I'll show later on. We have the idle mixture screw left, and before we remove that, make sure to turn it clockwise. Half a turn, 1 turn, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 3.25, or 3 3/4. Make sure to count how many turns it was out, so when you rebuild the carb, you know exactly what to set it to. And now on this carb, it's actually just a spring. And the mixture screw itself with a little O-ring on top here. Let's put aside as well. And now we can access the needle valve. Yeah, it's really hard to get that out by hand. We're gonna replace it, so we can actually take some pliers and use some, not too much force, just to get it out. So there's a little mesh here that's kind of prone to get dirty over time, especially when you let the carburetor sit for a long time and then there's not enough fuel coming into the carb and it won't run. What we didn't see now is there's an O-ring in here as well, that just came off with the float bowl. So that goes in there. Now of course you can replace those seals, but they are still pretty good on this carburetor. So we are just gonna open up the air valve, the air cutoff valve I guess it's called. And now we get that out. It's the cover here, a little spring, and then this membrane. Now usually there's a little screw in here that holds this thingy in place. I can't get it out. It's stuck. I guess the previous owner kind of glued it in, so I'm gonna try to just secure it back in place. I'm not gonna rebuild that, but just in case you want to know, it's actually like this little copper washer here. Then you have this valve which goes in here like that, and then there's a little spring underneath it with an O-ring. With that, we have completely disassembled the carb, and now you're asking like, hey Alan, this carb looks so clean. Why do we even need to wash that? That's right, that's already cleaned. So what we are now gonna do is we're gonna put the carb back together and yeah, make sure we get it running. Now we're gonna assemble the whole carb back together, and for that I have already laid out my my spare O-rings and stuff, and I have some additional carb repair kits, not exactly from this model but from another model, and also some O-rings, which is not necessary but it's quite handy if you have like assortment on hand. So if you mess up anything or you don't have the right size or whatever, then you know where to go. First off, I already replaced this O-ring, so we can just take the main nozzle and the needle and put that right in here. And make sure that the new O-ring gets squished right and doesn't hang out on any side, so it gets pushed in right. And this one can now be secured with an 8mm. Of course, from whatever reason I don't have that laying around, so I'm just gonna tighten that with some pliers really carefully. And then the main nozzle is a 7. We're also gonna tighten that on here. Make sure to not over tighten because it's all brass and you can strip it out really easily, but on the same side you shouldn't go too soft on them, otherwise they will start working their way out and you will have a problem on your next off-road ride. Once we've done that, we're gonna insert the pilot jet, which is cleaned. Always make sure to really look through the hole and see if the hole is round, if there's any dirt in there. So we're just gonna drop that in here and screw that on. And please don't over tighten it, just with some feeling. That's it. Next up, we're gonna insert our new needle valve. This one already has a brand new O-ring on it, so it can just be slid in. like that, and then we're gonna secure that in place. Then now we have the pilot jet in, the main jet in, and we have the fuel valve in. So next up we're gonna take our new fuel needle, attach it to the slide or to the float. And we slide in this pin from that side. Now next up we're gonna measure the float level. So to do that we're gonna take a ruler, and now we need to measure the distance on when the float just starts to close. So it's not free floating anymore, but it starts to press on the needle. So like at this point where it's not open, but it's not pressed down, so it's like this. And now we measure, and right now we get like 25 millimeter here. I just double checked the factory specs. They say 26 millimeters plus minus 1. So let's recheck that again. From this line here to the top of the float, we get 25. So I now want to make it perfect and get 26. And to do that, it's really easy. We just need to push down on that little tab here. So we're gonna carefully take a screwdriver, try to bend that just a tiny bit, and now once that's done we're gonna measure again, and now it's right at 25.5. so let's give it another little push. And of course this can also be done the other way around. And now we are perfectly well at 26 millimeter. Nice. So before we close off the float bowl, we're gonna take this replacement O-ring, put it in here, and then we're gonna take the float bowl cover, and as you can see there's gonna be a gasket which will be placed in here. So that's a quite specific one. By the way, if you can't get one because you're in the desert or whatever, then you can also use Dirco or some other sealant maker which is fuel resistant. And from my experience that works totally fine when you don't smear too much of it in there. Now we're gonna assemble that. You can either use some grease to make sure that doesn't pop out of place, or we can just carefully try to assemble it and make sure that the O-ring seals nicely, that there's no gap around here whatsoever. And now we are gonna get some new bolts. That's the short ones here. There we go, float ball installed. We can trash those parts, and now we can put in the new air fuel screw. So with this one as well, we're gonna remove the O-ring and replace it with a new one. And now we open it again for half, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 3 3/4. There we go. So now we got the bottom part assembled. So I feel now let's assemble the top part here. So first off, make sure that it's still washer, clip, washer and needle. This one here is in the third needle clip. Place that in here, and now that's a bit finicky. We're gonna make sure that the slide goes in this direction because of the groove here and the groove there. So it goes in like this, and the arm will be on the left hand side, so like that. Okay, make them tight, but don't over tighten them. What an awesome instruction. There we go. So now we have this one assembled. We are now gonna put back in place the arm. And to do that, we need to push in this little ball in here. And to make it easier, if you can see that, there's a little spring down here. We need to push up. Actually, no, I was lying. We need to push it down. So this little part needs to be pushed down. And once we do that, we can just slide that in place. It's moving freely in all directions, and we can mount. So now we're sliding in the arm like that, and next we can take this whole assembly and move it back in place. So it's gonna be a little washer on the left hand side. So washer goes in here, and this one goes like that. So it's limited in movement by this part here. Then we add in this little spring. That's really easy. You just push that out a bit, try to find a way to fiddle it underneath here, like that, without any force, and it should just attach right here. Push that out again, and then we're gonna mount this part here, and that will actually hold the spring tension, and we're just gonna turn that around. So like this, it's loose. We're just gonna turn that like that, not more. Hold it in place, and then this will be attached on here. There we go, put that on there. That's tight. And now we can attach this arm by moving the throttle a bit until the holes match here. Oop. Let's push in the screw, move it a bit until it matches, keep it there. There we go. So now check the full movement, if that works. Yes, it does. Looks fine. Now let's add this cover to it. But we are going to use this new gasket. Put that on here. It's really important that there is no air gap here, otherwise it will draw in false air, and we don't want that. Just for the video's sake, I'm gonna reassemble this part again, but I need to re-drill and redo a bolt here to hold that in place, so I'm gonna take it apart after it once more. So with this one, I'm actually now not quite sure how it goes, if it goes in there like this or like that. So one pretty easy way of figuring that out is you see a little lip here on this side, but there is no lip on the other side. Here is a flat part, and here is a grooved part. So the lip you see here always goes into the groove, so it stays in secured. Like that, and then you can place the spring probably on here and make sure now that you are not moving the membrane too much anymore. Now there we go, I guess that's a full seal. Hold that down. Now for the choke, we don't replace anything on here, that's still all good. So we're gonna take this assembly, put the choke in here, and then push out this lever so it holds it. And now we can basically just take this assembly, put it on here, and now we're gonna screw in this part. I guess the only thing left here is to attach the idle screw. There we go. So that's the main carb fully rebuilt here. Now we're gonna take on the secondary carb and then we're gonna mate them back together to be one. Now here, this O-ring will also need to be replaced. Of course, as you can see, there's no matching one in there. So we're gonna figure out if we have another one we could use. So this one looks as it could nicely fit. Take this first, put it in. Now we're going to reuse that gasket. I cleaned it, but it's still in good shape. So we're just going to put the slider in like that. And now we can take this part. And of course, don't forget the spring. And we just reassemble it. So now we have primary and secondary carb rebuilt. It's just a matter of getting them together. That's easily done. There's a tube here. I already replaced that. And you just put them together again. And now we can use this little mounting bracket. Don't tighten those bolts yet, because we're going to take this part. Now of course we need a tube here. That's just going to be a normal rubber tube, but I'm gonna put some protection around it so it doesn't burn or do whatever we don't like. Now we got the whole carb reassembled and we want to do like a quick function check. So first off, of course, we're gonna pull the throttle and see if that opens the slider here, and if that also activates the throttle flap after a certain amount of engagement. So that's good. And then we also need to check if this slider still moves freely and doesn't just fall down but goes slowly back down. Here is a fuel overflow tube here as well. And here is the actual fuel line where it goes in. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed watching and you're looking forward to rebuild your own carburetor. See you soon.